In this video, we're going to take a look at relationships between types using GraphQL. So clearly, what we want to achieve is that each car should belong to a user. So users have cars and cars belong to users. But at the moment, we have a list of users and we have a list of cars with no meaningful relationship between them. So what we want to do, first of all, is have a look at this car type. So for this car type, we really want to denote that a car has a user. So how can we make that particular relationship? So we could add a new field for the type car, and we could call this owner, which should it be a string? Should it be an integer? Well, no, it should be a user type. And we could make this non-nullable so that every car must have a user, right? Because otherwise it's an abandoned car. So by representing this relationship, we now relate the car to the type user. But of course, we need to modify our data as well, because we need to make sure that there's a linkage between the cars and the users. So let's in fact update the cars and add a new property called owned by, and then an ID. So we say that this first car is owned by this first user. The second car is also owned by this user. And then this last car, let's say it's owned by the third user or the second user. It doesn't really matter, right? You can enter whatever you want in there. So let's save this. Okay, so let's go and do a quick test and open up our playground, refresh this. And okay, so let's just do car ID 2 and let's have the make listed. And then we should now be able to type in the owner, and we should be able to see the name of this car's owner. Okay, so what do we have here? We have an error that says cannot return null for non-nullable field car.owner. So what's happening here? Well, it's really simple. We basically added a new property to the car type, but the car itself, the data itself, doesn't have an owner entity in the data set. So in our model, nowhere we specify an owner. We have owned by. So this means that the default resolver function is not going to work, because it is never going to return a user type, right? It's always going to return this number. So this means that what we need to do is to create a custom resolver explicitly targeted for returning the actual user information based on the owned by property that we added. So how can we do that? Well, let's add a comma here. And what is the type that we want to add the custom resolver for? What is the car type? And here we want to resolve the owner field. So let's add that. And let's just add, we have our list of parameters here. Parent is the first one. And in fact, that's the only parameter that we're going to send. And let's just do a console log parent here and see what happens. Remember earlier when we did log parent, we got undefined. And then I said that it's undefined because there's nothing that is being resolved beforehand. So let's save this now. Come back to our playground, hit run. Of course, we still get the error, but let's go back to our console and notice that parent is no longer undefined. So what do we see here? So all these fields that come from the car type are returned to us. So that is the sort of parent value. That's what parent refers to. That's the result of us calling the default resolver function for our type, and then the custom resolver function can access the result of this default resolver function. And if you notice, we have owned by here. So what does that mean? Well, that really means that in this particular custom resolver, we can return users, and we could say parent dot owned by. But before we save and test this, let's remind ourselves what users is. So users is an array, which is of course 0 indexed. So that means that we can't just use this owned by ID, because we need to do -1 from that to get to the actual owner, the actual user of that car. So let's save this now. So let's see here, car ID1 has an owner, and let's see the name of this owner. Okay, so Ford Focus is owned by apparently myself. Car number 2 as well. Car number 3 is owned by a guy called Steven, and we could print out the ID of the owner, so we now have access to essentially the user type and all the fields belonging to that user type. And there we go, so car ID3 belongs to that particular owner. What happens when we do cars? We then get a list of all the cars with, and let's remove this ID, with the names of the owners. So Ford Focus and Fiat 500 owned by Tosh, Mercedes is owned by Steven. So in this video, we explored how to achieve relationship between types using GraphQL.